In this video, we'll talk about how to make adjustments to selections in Photoshop using selection modes. These techniques are key for being able to make quick and easy selections of any parts of any pixel-based image. I've already got a couple files open here in Photoshop that we'll practice with, rose.jpg and collagetemplate.psd. Those are both in the demo files for this week. Thinking about selecting the rose out from the background might feel really daunting, and that's normal. When you're first getting used to working in Photoshop, making selections can feel really cumbersome and awkward. But learning about selection modes can make your life way easier. They let us build up selections in stages rather than having to do them all at once. Right now, I've got the rectangular marquee tool active, and no matter which selection tool you're using, you'll have at least 3, if not more, selection modes that can change the behavior of your selection tool. You can find them in the status bar. So I've got an icon here for new selection. In this mode, the tool draws a brand new selection. If you have an existing one, that will be cleared out and replaced. We've got an icon for add to selection, which adds more pixels to an existing selection. You can also switch to this mode by holding down Shift on the keyboard while you're selecting. There's one for subtract from selection. This removes pixels from an existing selection, and we can access that by holding down Alt or Option on the keyboard while selecting. And finally, we have intersect with selection. This keeps only the overlapping parts of two selections, and we could access that by holding Option Shift or Alt Shift on the keyboard while we're drawing a selection. Depending on which selection tool you're using, the icons for select modes might look slightly different, but they all behave the same way and they use the same keyboard shortcuts. Let's see what our selection modes can do. We just need an initial selection to start with, so let's click in the toolbar to activate our Object Selection tool. This is a really cool automatic selection tool that tries to separate out an object from its background, and it works especially well if you have an object with a nice distinct edge. All we do is draw a rectangle by clicking and dragging over the part that we're interested in, and then let go. Now I can see Photoshop's done an okay job of making the selection here. It's maybe a little bit off in places like these tight corners and these two front leaves. I'd actually like to include those in my selection. Luckily, I can use selection modes to add or subtract from this rather than having to do it all over again. So let's do some subtractions first, and for that, probably the lasso tool is going to be easiest for me. Now, this is the great part about working with selection tools. There's really no right or wrong tool to use. It's really whatever you're comfortable with. Of course, some tools are better suited than others in different situations, but if you're really steady-handed and quick with the lasso tool and haven't had too many cups of coffee, it could be a good one for you. All right, so I want to make sure that my mode is set to subtract from selection. Again, I could click that from the status bar, or I could also hold down Alt or Option as I'm drawing. And I'm just going to draw sort of a little wedge shape here, and that will carve out from my existing selection. And then I just let go to close it off. Same thing here. I'm just going to click and drag and make sure that I'm overlapping with the existing selection. If you make a mistake, no big deal. You can just hit Command Z in Mac or Control Z in Windows on your keyboard to undo. And so I'm just moving around the border here, zooming in as I need to. I know this can seem a little bit nitpicky, but believe me, edges matter. And if you actually want to be a skilled digital designer or artist, you really need to pay attention to these sorts of things because they will show up in your work. Now, I want to do some work on these two leaves in the front here. I can see Photoshop tried to select those, but it's really jagged there. So I'm actually just going to chop off that whole part of the selection by drawing around it. And so you can see kind of what's happening here when we're in this subtract mode. Any parts of the existing selection that we're overlapping with get chopped off. And I want to take care of this little space in here. Now for these leaves, I might give it a try with the lasso tool, but I'll need to make sure I switch to add to selection mode, and I can do that either by clicking in the status bar or holding down Shift as I draw. Again, just making sure to overlap. Now for this edge here, I think I might switch to the magnetic lasso tool. So I'll click that from my toolbar, and let's just make sure we're still in add to selection mode. So I'll click that icon. I could also hold down Shift as I draw. And I'll just double click to close that out. So that's looking much better. Let's go ahead up to the menu bar and click Edit Copy. Then click on our Collage tab and click Edit Paste. So there you can see I've got a nice clean selection. So again, those selection modes will work in any of the selection tools. And the idea of being a skilled selector is that you don't have to do everything all in one fell swoop. You can build up a selection in stages, and that makes it way easier and way more flexible. So that's an overview of adjusting selections with select mode in Photoshop.